The only thing that changed was the lighting. The lens didn't really matter. The film, no. The camera, it just had to work. The lighting, right? In 40 years of commercial shooting, lighting was my single biggest investment. Not cameras, not lenses, lighting. Because in commercial photography, lighting isn't a creative choice, it's a technical requirement. And if you don't control it completely, you don't have a shot. You have a problem. So let me walk you through what an average shooting day actually looked like. Right? I'd arrive at the studio. Um, we had 30 photographers under one roof. And you'd get there, you'd get your layout for the day or your layouts. And a typical page had anywhere from 3 to 9 images on it. Every single one of those images had to have an identical background, right? The client had determined, usually the catalog had a consistent theme and it was either no theme or a paint color, but the client dictated the background tone before we even started. And it had to be consistent across the entire page, dead consistent. Because when you laid that page flat, any variation looked odd immediately and it looked wrong. It looked like a mistake. So it wasn't just flat consistency. Most layouts had fall off. Right? The background had to fade from light to dark at a very specific point, and if there was 3 images across, it had to all be identical in every image. And it was dictated by text that the art directors had set previous to us shooting it. You'd get your layout, everything was laid out, all the text, all the copy. I was always impressed how dead accurate the art directors were as far as drawing the actual image in the layout, the product itself. They were good. So you kind of get the idea. There is no way of doing that with available light. You have to light every shot, obviously. And that's the whole point of this. And on top of all of that, the product itself had to pop. Right? It couldn't just look good. It had to pop off the page. Better than life. It had to be three-dimensional. The texture had to be visible, pronounced, almost feelable. If it was smooth, it had to read smooth. If it was reflective, we had to control every single reflection. Right? If it was rough, the texture had to jump off the page. The product had to lift out of the image and make someone want to reach for it, to buy it. Now that is not a camera decision, it's not a lens decision, and it's not even a composition decision. Every one of those requirements, the consistency, the fall off, the texture, the pop, the three-dimensional separation, all of it came down to one thing, the lighting. The lens never changes that. The film doesn't change that at all. And the camera doesn't change that. The only thing that changes it is the lighting. Now, the first studio I worked in, I was an assistant, and I got to work for a photographer named Ron Booth. 2 years of college was rendered completely worthless within the first day I worked with him. And I mean that literally, not as an insult to the education system, but this guy had so much talent and so much experience. And I would come home week after week with a splitting headache just from trying to absorb what he had to share. The wealth of knowledge this man carried was extraordinary. And he shared it, which in that world, in that era, was genuinely unusual. Most commercial photographers kept everything to themselves. They didn't tell you how they saw, they didn't tell you how they solved things. You learned by fire or you didn't learn at all. And Ron was different. And because of that, everything I understood about commercial lighting started in that studio. And then there was Howard, our sales rep. Now, Howard was a wonderful man, gentle, patient, generally good at what he did. But he understood something that a lot of people in that world missed. Every image that left that studio was his reputation on the line, not ours. The client never met the photographer. They met Howard. So when he came in at the end of the day to pick up the images to deliver to the client the next morning, he wasn't just collecting film. He was signing off on his own professional credibility. And Howard had a standard, particularly around lighting, particularly around the three-dimensional pop that separated a great commercial image from something that was just going to disappear into the noise of a page. And if an image didn't meet that standard, he would just pick it up and throw it onto the floor and would pretend to pee on it. So his expression was, it's flatter than piss on a plate. And we knew exactly what that meant. Yeah, we're reshooting that image. It kind of sounds funny, but it was also completely serious because Howard understood what that image had to do before it even got near the client. It had to stop someone in a magazine, in a newsprint, in a catalog, in whatever format it landed in. It had to reach off the page and grab the viewer before they turned it. A flat image doesn't do that. A flat image is just noise, and noise doesn't sell product. And product that doesn't sell means the client doesn't call back. And Howard knew that. He just had his own way of saying it. Flatter than piss on a plate meant lighting failed. And in commercial photography, the lighting is never allowed to fail. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so how do you actually control light at that level? Consistently shoot after shoot. Well, in the big production studios, we built our own diffusion panels. They're simple 1x2 pine frames with tracing tissue taped to the frame. Now, here's the interesting part. Right? We had 30 shooters in the studio. Every shooter had their own way of reaching the same outcome. Right? We had 30 different photographers, 30 different ways of lighting. So there isn't really a right or wrong way of lighting an image. There are basic principles, right? If you want to have texture in a product and the camera is where you are from your vantage point, you don't light from the front because you have no texture. You're just filling in all the shape and shadow with light. And if you bring your lighting from behind the back 2/3, depending on what the product is, you now create pop because you're creating shadows that bring out the details, right? So we used to use these wood frames with tracing tissue taped to the frame, and I would bring mine in as close to the subject as possible, right, without getting them in the shot. I loved the intensity, right? Everything I loved working hot. So I would bring the lights in as close as physically possible. Now, obviously, you have to bring in your fill from the other side, so the ratios don't go beyond a stop to a stop and a half in total, because the film would just lose it. See, now the fun part about using these wood frames with the tracing tissue is we used Mole Ridges and hot lights, basically tungsten 750s, 1Ks, 2Ks. And then you could position the hot lights behind them at whatever angle you needed to shape the light exactly what each product demanded. It was simple, it was cheap, and it was completely effective. Tracing tissue and a $3,000 softbox are having the exact same conversation with the light. The physics are identical, the results are identical, the price is not. And I know this for a fact because I tested it directly. Right, one of our suppliers brought in a demo light to the studio. It was called a Lucifer, which I thought was a great name for a lighting unit, by the way. And it was a large format softbox with multiple tungsten bulbs inside. It was impressive looking, well built, clearly designed to solve the exact problem our homemade frames were solving. And I tested it thoroughly, ran it through real shooting conditions. And when the studio manager asked me if it was worth the investment, I just said no. Right? I could replicate everything it did with a wood frame and tracing tissue. Replace the tissue as needed, total cost, nothing significant. It was a nice piece of kit, it looked professional, it was genuinely well made, but it wasn't necessary. And in a commercial studio running real budgets against real deadlines, necessary was the only standard that mattered. The principle is what matters, never the material. Understand what the light needs to do, then use whatever gets you there. Right? Lighting direction, that's where the real craft lives. If you want shape on an object, if you want that edge to pop, that three-dimensional lift, the light has to come from somewhat behind it, from the back 2/3 of the image, not from the front, not from the side, from behind. And most photographers light from the front because it's easier. It's also flat every single time. Now, the work that taught me this most directly was crystal and silverware. That was my mainstay in the big studio. Crystal is one of the most technically demanding subjects you could photograph. Right? You're not lighting a surface, you're lighting through an object, and the light has to pass through the crystal, refract, create brilliance, while simultaneously defining the edge and separating it from the background. And I developed my own system to solve that properly. So I shot the crystal on a 4x10-foot glass table, which allowed me to light the crystal on one plane and the background on a completely separate plane, 3.5 feet below. Because the crystal needed one kind of light and the background needed something entirely different. Right? We always had the fall off depending on where the text was. And if they're on the same two planes, those requirements really fight each other. Now, as soon as you separate the planes, you could solve each one cleanly, easily. Right? Two separate lighting setups, two separate problems, one image. That's what controlling light actually looks like. Not pointing a softbox at something and hoping, understanding exactly what each element needs and building the light to deliver it precisely. So here's what I want to leave with you. Everything I've described today, the consistency requirements, the fall-off precision, the three-dimensional pop power demanded, the separate lighting planes, all that is still standard. None of that has ever changed. What changed is the equipment you need to meet it. Right? When I was shooting in the big studios, my lighting bags, and I usually had 3 Rhino bags that were just with my lighting gear in it, and they each weighed somewhere between 50 and 100 pounds. Power packs that output 5,000 watts each. You need a minimum of 3 of those with at least 6 heads for a basic shoot. So they were heavy, they were expensive, and completely non-negotiable if you're going to control light. because we shot large format and film. Today, battery-powered strobes that fit in a carry-on. Digital cameras with a sensitivity range that means you need a fraction of the light output you're running. Right? Instant feedback on a tethered monitor. The ability to see exactly what the light is doing before you commit to a single frame. It has genuinely never been easier to control light as a professional commercial standard than it is right now. The knowledge is the same. The principles are identical. Howard standards never moved an inch. But the barrier to building the light you need has dropped dramatically, which means the only thing standing between you and commercial quality lighting is understanding what the light needs to do. The only thing that changes it is the lighting. I'm Ferdinand. Welcome to the wrong side of the camera.